So we're going to be talking about solving quadratic equations by square root. Now, something you're going to notice about quadratic equations is that it's going to be an ax squared plus bx plus c, and it's going to be set equal to 0. Now, this brings back to polynomials where we talked about this form, this ax squared plus bx plus c. The thing about solving quadratic equations by square roots is a lot of the times in these, you will not have a bx value. You will have an ax squared plus c or minus c and set it equal to 0. The idea of this, of how you would solve, is that you're going to use these following steps. So you're going to use addition or subtraction to isolate the variable term. You're going to then divide or multiply to isolate the variable. Step 3 is you're going to square root both sides to get rid of that squared value. And then you are going to take the next step, which is 4, where you're going to simplify and you're going to include the plus or minus with your final answer. That determines, that plus or minus tells you that that is two different solutions. So it's plus. So it's a positive solution and a negative solution for that value that you get for your answer. If the number on the right is negative, you will have a no solution type of equation. So that's something that's very important, okay? So we're going to start off with our first example. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get x squared by itself because we're trying to find out what x equals. So anytime you're solving a quadratic equation, you're trying to figure out what x equals. And that is because that is going to be, when you graph, you're going to have what's called a parabola. And that is where if you have your, let's say that you have your x and your y, or your x-axis and your y-axis, it's where it crosses at the x-axis. That's what we're trying to find. So you have your parabola, which is a quadratic equation, and we're trying to figure out where it actually crosses at the x-axis. So we're finding x-intercepts. So we're going to get x squared by itself, we're going to add 98 to both sides. And it's going to be 2x squared equals 98. We are then going to divide by 2 because we want to get x squared by itself. So we're going to get x squared equals 98 divided by 2. That's going to be 49. We're then still trying to get x by itself. So to get rid of the squared value, you're going to take the square root of both sides. So I'm going to be left with, because this is a perfect square value, is equal to plus or minus 7. That represents that it's 7 and negative 7 for my answer. That's what that plus or minus stands for. Now, for our next one, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to try to get g squared by itself. So I'm going to subtract by 16 on both sides. I get negative 2g squared equals negative 16. I'm still trying to get g by itself, so I'm going to divide by negative 2. And I get g squared equals 8. I'm going to then take the square root of both sides because I want to get rid of that squared value. And I get g equals plus or minus the square root of 8. Now, because I can't take the value, the square root of 8 evenly, or it's not a perfect square value, I'm going to now simplify. So I'm going to find the greatest perfect square value to take out of 8, so that is 4. So I'm going to break it up as 4 times the square root of 2. So my final answer is going to be g equals, so it's plus or minus 2 square root 2. That is my final answer. So now I have t squared minus 24 equals 0. I'm going to add 24 on both sides. So I get t squared equals 24. I want to get rid of that squared, so I'm going to take the square root of both sides, and I get t is equal to, it's going to be plus or minus the square root of 24. Because I can't take the square root of 24 evenly, I'm now going to simplify. So I'm going to take the greatest perfect square value out, and that's going to be 4. times the square root of 6. So my final answer is going to be t equals plus or minus, it's going to be 2 square root 6. Now for this next one, I want to get y squared by itself, so I'm going to subtract 546 on each side. I get negative 3y squared equals negative 546. I'm going to divide by a negative 3. I get y squared equals, now that's going to become 182. I'm going to take the square root of both sides, and I get y equals plus or minus the square root of 182. So now I'm going to try to figure out how can I simplify this, and I'm going to look through all my values. I'm going to do like 182 divided by 4, 182 divided by 9, 182 divided by 16. These are perfect square values. 182 divided by 25, 182 divided by 36. If you go through the entire list, you're going to notice that you can't take a perfect square value out. So you would just leave this as your final answer. Okay, my next one is I'm going to add 72 to both sides. Now I get a negative 2x squared equals a positive 72. I'm going to divide by negative 2 on each side. And I'm going to get x squared equals a negative 36. Now, if I take the square root of both sides, you're going to notice that it's x equals plus or minus the square root of negative 36. That can't happen, so this would actually just be no solution. Okay, my last one. Okay, so in these, you have to make sure, this looks a little bit different than what we've been doing on this page, but the idea is that you have to remember that you want to get the x squared or that squared value by itself. So what I'm going to do is I have to get rid of these two terms here. Okay, so first I'm going to see that I have a 5x and I have a 5x. Okay. So what I'm doing is I have to move that 5x and I have to move that negative 32. So first, let's move the 5x. So if I subtract 5x to get it to the other side, look what happens. This cancels and so does this. So I'm left with x squared minus 32 equals 0. So now I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to add 32 on each side. And I'm left with x squared equals a positive 32. I'm now going to take the square root of x squared to get rid of that squared, and I get x equals plus or minus the square root of 32. I then have to ask myself, okay, can I break this down to a greater perfect square value? And the greatest perfect square value I can take out is the square root of 16. So I'm left with, my final answer is x equals plus or minus 4 square root 2.